Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. This is Shelley Moore, and I am back to read you one of my short stories off my website, limitlessstimulus.com. I want to apologize first and foremost because I'm a little raspy this morning. I don't think it's the Rona. Fingers crossed, knock on wood. But I did wake up a little raspy. I think it's just the weather, It's middle of November. I'm in northern Massachusetts. It was 14 degrees when we woke up this morning, and I've got my hot coffee here, so you might hear me take sips here and there. Like I've said before, this is a highly unprofessional audiobook. This is pretend I'm a friend, if I'm not already a friend, reading a story to you. So I like to say that, you can put your earbuds in and lay down in bed and let me read you a scary story, or at your desk with your earbuds in and pretending to work, or in your car. Whatever it is that you do when you read these stories, I appreciate it. And of course, share them far and wide too, because it is actually really fulfilling for me to entertain people for free during all this chaos. I think stories have always been such an awesome way for me personally to escape life. And I think that's why I like writing so much. If I don't write for an extended period of time, I tend to get really depressed. And I think that's because with any passion really that you have, you need to follow it, because if you don't, then your soul feels it and it aches for that thing. So I've written a lot of different things over the years. I've written tons of poetry and blogs, and when I was a professional paranormal investigator for over 10 years, I had a blog that got up to almost 23,000 followers, which was just gigantic for me, and it's all I would write is about the investigations we went on. I would give like firsthand accounts and post pictures and stuff like that, audio evidence and things like that. So I really enjoy writing in all of its shapes and forms and sizes, and just whether I'm good at it or not doesn't really matter to me. I just want to write all the time. It's literally what I want to spend my time doing all the time. And so when the pandemic first started and we were all dealing with newfound stress, when we're all home with our families, either furloughed from your jobs or laid off, or, whatever was going on. And then on top of that, you have the stress of the pandemic itself, which is something we never thought we'd have to deal with, and we don't know how to deal with still. I mean, it's November. It's been going on for a year now, technically, I guess, speaking, even really since March, but they say it's been around since November, so who knows. But we're all still learning to adjust, and so I think it's really important to give yourself and your mind a break here and there. So when I came up with this website and I decided, I'm going to make this website, I'm going to start writing stories for people to enjoy now. And I thought I'm going to do short stories because nobody's like me anymore. Nobody likes to sit down and read a book. So if I make them short, maybe people will be more apt to read them. That was my line of thinking anyway. And then I thought, well, what kind of stories would my friends and family like to read? And everybody's always talking about scary movies and, scary stuff like that. So I thought, okay, I'll do scary. I can do that. I can do this. I've never actually written a scary story in my entire life, but hey, I'm going to try it. So I don't know. I've written maybe 10, 12 at this point, and I'd like to think I'm pretty decent at it, but whatever. They're getting better as they go. This was actually one of the first ones that I put out, and it's not even really a scary story. If you've read all my other stories, it really doesn't tend to fit in with any of them. So this is more of a true crime genre, I guess you could call it. It's true crime-ish is probably what I would call it, because I'm a huge Dateline nerd. I love Dateline. I love Crime Junkie podcast. I love Snapped. I love Unsolved Mysteries. Oh my God, Unsolved Mysteries. Let's talk about Unsolved Mysteries. Best show ever, right? So when I was younger, pardon my voice, my goodness. When I was younger, it's one of the only shows that I can remember my family, my father and my mother and my two younger sisters and I gathering in the living room to watch. And I can vividly remember us laying on the carpet in front of the couches while my dad and my mom were on the couch, and that amazing spooky intro comes on, and then Robert Stack comes on with that incredible, mysterious, creepy as hell, sexy ass voice. I'm probably the only person on the planet who's ever referred to Robert Stack's voice as sexy. But I digress. That's obviously shows you my love for Unsolved Mysteries. The theme song was actually my ringtone for a while. It's not now. Now it's the Office theme song. But anyway, so yeah, I'm big nerd, big nerd, and so proud. I wear it so proudly. So this story is true crime-ish. And I did put a little warning up top because of that. I said it may be triggering for some because of its true crime nature, really. And again, not very professional, but you're going to hear me take sips every now and again just to catch my voice. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and read it. It's called The Neighbor. It's written by myself, Shelley Moore. And again, there's a warning. It may be triggering for some. It was mid-July, and my vegetable garden was in desperate need of watery relief. I called out to my dog, put his blue harness around his little front legs, and buckled the top while I kissed the top of his head, hooked the leash to the metal rings on top, and opened the door to walk outside. The air was thick and damp, which was typical for an Ohioan midsummer. We natives affectionately refer to it as armpit weather, which is a surprisingly adequate description. The sun felt like a warm blanket on my skin as I walked quickly over the hot asphalt of my driveway to the soft, tepid grass which felt heavenly under my bare feet. I hooked my pup up to his lead, grabbed his metal water bowl, and relished in the feeling of the warm earth beneath my toes as I made my way over to the garden hose to fill it. I could hear Queen's Somebody to Love playing on my neighbor's outdoor radio, and I sang along quietly as I carefully walked the filled water bowl over to my four-legged little love, who was now rolling around on his back in the summer sun-warmed grass, legs splayed in the air, mouth open, and tongue hanging out sideways in a show of pure canine joy. I scratched his little belly, and I told him what a handsome, good boy he was. And when he stood to get a drink of the fresh water I'd just brought him, I made my way back down to the spigot. I removed the 100-foot-long, supposedly unkinkable garden hose from its holster one loop at a time and turned the spigot on. My dog's ears instantly pinned to the sides of his head, and his tail tucked between his little white legs. He hated the hose, about as much as children hate Brussels sprouts and dentists. I called over to him and calmly assured him it wasn't bath time, and then continued to sing along with Freddie Mercury as I made my way over to my beloved garden. "Hey, neighbor," he called over to me from across the fence through the tree line. I couldn't really see him, but he apparently could see me, so I waved in his general direction and thanked the gods for the sunglasses covering my eyes, successfully hiding my confusion as I scanned for him. I resumed my watering, lovingly and delicately picking through my giant squash, romaine, and tomato leaves, feeling a bit like a green garden goddess for having watched these beauties sprout up from tiny seeds mere weeks ago. Nothing brought me joy the way gardening did. Feeling the soil between your fingers and smelling the earth as you tend to its offspring is a bliss that cannot possibly be described sufficiently in words alone. "Looking good," a gruff voice suddenly said from behind me. Startled, I spun to see my neighbor had made his way into my backyard and was now standing 5 feet from me. "Thanks. This is only my second year attempting to grow veggies, so I'm pretty proud," I replied. Friendly by nature, I welcomed the conversation. "I have some tomatoes growing on my porch. You should come over and see them sometime," he said, eyes squinted and cigarette firmly gripped between his pursed lips. "Believe it or not, I'm not a huge fan of tomatoes. I grow them, but mostly for my kids. They eat them like candy," I said as I continued to water my garden. "Where are they today?" he asked. "At friends' houses. I'm enjoying some much-needed mama time," I smiled. He said, taking a long drag from his cancer stick and then flicking it into the woods behind me, which bothered me slightly because it was on my property, but I let it go. I'd pick it up after he left. Only then did the silence between us begin to grow uncomfortable, and I started feeling a bit uneasy in his presence. I caught myself thinking about our security cameras. Were they pointed in this direction? I didn't think so. One faced the front yard, one faced the driveway. Before I had time to finish that thought, he grabbed me in a tight bear hug, my arms pinned to my waist. With his mouth against my ear and his ashtray breath hot on my skin, he said, "Stop struggling. You know you want this just as much as I do." I screamed and kicked with adrenaline coursing through my veins and anger, not fear, swelling in my chest. How dare he? I had been nothing but neighborly to him for the last several years. I had never once flirted with him or led him on in any way. I left cookies on his front porch for the last few years for Christmas. Had he misinterpreted that as flirtatious? How dare he feel he could do this to me? My dog barked as ferociously as a 16-pound dog could bark and tried desperately to escape his harness to come to my aid. I screamed, flailed, and kicked wildly. I was not going to let this be easy for him. He brought a muscular arm around my neck and placed me in a tight chokehold, and I felt things crunch and snap within my neck as I gasped desperately for air. I stared with terror-stricken eyes at my sweet, sweet little pup as the world went dark around me. The next thing I saw was the nicotine-yellowed ceiling of a camper. My throat hurt. My head hurt and my wrists hurt. As I slowly regained consciousness, I realized my wrists had been tightly bound with a plastic zip tie behind me. I had a fabric of some sort in my mouth that tasted like it had been used to wipe motor oil from dirty hands in the recent past, and duct tape wrapped tightly around my face so that I couldn't scream. I fought the overwhelming urge to gag. I closed my eyes and attempted to calm my racing heart. The only way I was going to get out of this was if I kept a calm, level head. I'm a smart girl. I can get out of this. "Wakey, wakey, little pet," he said to me from the other end of the camper. I hadn't noticed him until he spoke. I glared at him, invisible daggers being thrown from my soul into his. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. "You and I, man, oh man, we're going to have so much fun," he hissed like a snake. He used a box cutter to slice my pants along the outside of my left leg and then my right. He then ripped them off, threw them to the camper's floor. A serpent's smile spread across his face as he caressed the top of my bare legs with his calloused fingers. I wanted to cry, but I didn't want to give him the satisfaction, so I didn't shed a single tear. I stared at him with silent fury, not breaking eye contact. He grabbed my right ankle and swung it around him so that he stood between my legs. I felt the overwhelming urge to vomit. "Dad?" A female's voice called from just outside the camper. His head snapped toward the camper door and his eyes grew wide. He put his finger to his mouth and the box cutter to my throat. "I'll be right out, hon. Give me just a sec." He called out to her, his finger still pressed to his lips. He leaned down and pressed his beard-stubbled cheek to mine and whispered, "I'll be back, my little pet. You stay right like this," he said as he kissed the duct tape on my lips, then raped me with his eyes. He left the camper, locking the door behind him. The moment he left, I put my bare feet on the floor of the camper and stood, taking stock of what was around me. It smelled old and musty, of cigarette smoke and mold, and looked as if it hadn't been cleaned in decades. There were no sheets on the bare mattresses, and the small sink had rust and at least a dozen dead flies adorning its drain. I walked to the door and pushed my ear to listen. I heard a door shut and realized I was inside the pop-up camper he stored behind his house. I was so close to my home. Just feet, really. The camper was just on the other side of our fence. So close, yet so devastatingly far. I thought about my poor little dog. Was he still tied to his lead? I listened, but I didn't hear him barking. I worried maybe he had gotten loose and ventured out into our busy road. I thought about my children, who'd be getting dropped off around dinner time. What would they think when they came home to an empty house, my car still parked in the driveway? And for that matter, I realized I didn't even know what time it was because I didn't know how long I'd been unconscious. I couldn't even be totally sure it was the same day. I felt tears start to form in the corner of my eyes, and I quickly stifled my emotions. I reminded myself that I needed to keep a clear head, or I would just become another Dateline story. I looked around the pop-up again. I knew from my childhood memories that pop-up campers usually had a window or a vent on the roof that could be opened. This one happened to be located directly above the sink. Could I fit through it? I didn't know, but I had to try. My hands were still bound behind my back, so climbing up onto the sink would not be an easy feat. The zip ties had been tied far too tight, breaking the skin slightly on my right wrist. My wrist aches, but adrenaline helped me forget about the pain so I could focus on survival. I leaned over the sink, laying the weight of my upper body on the counter and swung my legs clumsily around. It worked. I was now laying with my face in the sink and my torso planking the counter beside it. I brought my knees to my stomach, trying to bring myself to a sitting or possibly a standing position, but I struggled. I turned onto my back and bent my knees so my feet were planted on the edge of the counter. I sat up and then stood and used my mouth to turn the crank open to the vent. It was so small. It might be too small for my childbearing hips to fit through, but I didn't know what other choice I had, so I just kept pushing forward with the only plan I had. Once the vent was fully opened, I stood fully erect with my head peeking out the top of the camper. I scanned my surroundings. The sun had either begun to set or rise. I wasn't quite sure, but hoped it was setting and only a few hours had passed since my abduction. I could hear traffic passing on our busy road just out of eyesight, and I could see the roof of my house. So close. I fought the urge to cry again, and my chest ached. I headbutted the plastic vent cap using the top of my head while jumping on the counter, careful not to lose my balance and fall, until it cracked and then broke. I felt the skin on my scalp split and warm blood as it trickled down my temples. How on earth was I going to lift my body out of this tiny hole without the use of my hands? I spun around again to surveil my surroundings and was surprised to see a girl of about 16 with bright red hair that fell in ringlets around her face and down her chest, standing in the driveway of my abductor, staring quizzically at me, mouth agape, head half-cocked, and brow furrowed. I couldn't scream. I couldn't beg for help, so instead I pleaded with every fiber of my being, using only my eyes for her to help me. They say the eyes are the window to the soul, and I prayed in this moment my soul would speak to hers. Just then, the back door to this house opened, and I quickly stooped down so I wouldn't be spotted. "Shit, Dad, will you go back inside and grab my sunglasses? I left them on my nightstand." The redhead quickly called out to my abductor. "Damn it, Elsie," he mumbled, and I heard the noisy storm door shut behind him once again. I cautiously peeked out the vent again. The girl was now at the door of the camper trying to open it up. "It's locked," she called out to me. "What do I do?" "Fuck, shit. Did my dad lock you up in there?" she asked with tears in her eyes. I could only stare back at her with pleading, desperate eyes. "Fuck, I can't open it. I'll go buy you some time. It's an old camper. You can probably kick out the door," she said. Then she turned and went back inside the house, shutting the door behind her. Kick out the door. Why hadn't I thought of that? God bless this girl. I jumped down from the counter and immediately began kicking at the door with all I had. It only took 4 strong kicks before the metal frame bent and gave way, and another 2 kicks broke the door right off its hinges. I ran from the camper, hands still bound behind my back, down his long driveway toward our busy road. I ran through my front yard and up to my front door and used my head to bang until I began to see stars. I could hear my dog barking wildly on the other side of the door. I banged harder. My head ached and the world around me began to fade as I came dangerously close to slipping out of consciousness. My 6-year-old son opened the door, and I fell onto the hard floor inside the entryway, slamming the door behind me with my feet. "What did Mom say about opening the door when she's not home?" My daughter snapped at her brother from the hallway. Upon seeing me, she dropped her phone to the hardwood floor with a solid thud and ran to me to remove the duct tape and rag from my mouth. "Lock the door. Lock all the doors. Lock the windows. Now, both of you." "Mom?" she began to ask, tears welling in her eyes, but I cut her off. "Do it now," I demanded. She grabbed the kitchen scissors and cut my wrists free, and I rubbed them as I ran to the phone to call the police. "Where were you, Mommy?" my boy asked. "I'm real hungry, but Sis wouldn't let me have ice cream because she's mean." That's when I finally allowed the floodgates to release, and I wept as I pulled my children into my chest and hugged them tightly, kissing their heads and telling them how much I loved them. "911, what's your emergency?" a woman's voice asked. The end.